Well, hello. I hope everybody's doing well tonight. And so, if you got your Bibles, turn over to Romans chapter number 12, and that's where we'll jump in at tonight. So, me and Brother Eric, we have known each other a really long time. And back when we first met, he was a young guy, and so he's not so young anymore. And but anyway, it's kind of wild how we become friends. He got transferred to Georgia there, and I remember one day at visitation we were about to go do outreach, and there was a new guy showed up, and so I thought, well, I guess I'll be nice to him, and started talking to him, and had no idea that we'd end up being friends for, I guess, maybe close to 20 years or something now. And so you never know how stuff like that's going to work out. And so he has been a good friend, and I feel like me and him have had many lengthy conversations about the Bible and doctrine and church and all those kind of things. And I feel like we both had some really good grounding to start with, but at the same time, we've had to kind of find our way about some things also. And the Word of God is the most powerful thing, and sometimes if we can just block out all the other noise in our life and figure out what's God's take on this might be the most important thing. And so the topic of the message tonight would be the will of God, but I would like to take it one step further and say the simplicity of the will of God. Now, I've been around church my entire life, been going from the time I was born, and the one thing that I've seen in a lot of places is anytime the will of God's talked about, it's made like super complicated, almost like this eerie thing that you can't figure out how to find it, but it's required of you. Now, I just got to be honest with you, that really paints God in a bad light. I've got 3 kids, and if I called one of them up here and said, do what I want you to do, without telling them what I want to do, y'all would look at me like I was some kind of tyrant to expect them just to figure it out. And so, to me, we get a misconception of who God is oftentimes, and we get frustrated and mad at God over something that we have a misunderstanding, and it's not something that He's expecting out of us. And what I mean by that is our perception of the will of God is oftentimes much different than what the Bible is about it. And that's what I'd like to spend some time talking about tonight. And so here's my objective. You take a class sometimes and the teacher tells you, this is what we want to accomplish. Well, the thing that we want to accomplish tonight is for us to figure out that God is not a tyrant. And God is very loving, and He's very kind and very patient with us. And when we start seeing Him in that light, and then we take what the Scripture says, what we may figure out is we might be performing right in the middle of the will of God and not even realize it. I went to a Christian school, and I remember in one of the Bible classes, my Bible teacher, he was teaching one day, and he talked about how everybody should know the will of God for their life. And he spent 45 minutes in that class hammering down about everybody should know the will of God for their life. And some of the guys I went to school with wasn't exactly the most upstanding citizens. And so as soon as class was over, the first thing that 2 of those guys did is they went and found the teacher's wife, and they started interrogating her about whether or not she knew if she was in the will of God. Well, obviously, she wasn't as squared away as he was, and so that created some problems. And they were just trying to stir up trouble anyway. But the point being is sometimes we make simple things extremely complicated, and then we get frustrated and aggravated because we feel like, we're not pleasing God, and we feel like we're not following God, and the whole time God's thinking, why don't you just calm down? He's thinking, you're doing great. What are you so upset about? Me and Mariana, we've had that conversation before. I don't know where she's at now, but we've had conversations before where she'd be all upset, and I'm like, what are you upset about? I think you're doing a great job. Everything's good. But she had just got in her mind that I was displeased with her. And because she was thinking that I was displeased with her, then it robbed her of her happiness. And look, the thing is like, her circumstance didn't need to change. It was just her perception of what was going on needed to change. And so let's look at Romans chapter number 12 for a minute tonight. And we'll start off in verse number 1, and we'll read verse number 1 and 2, and we'll kind of talk about this a little bit more. But it says, I beseech you therefore, brethren, by the mercies of God, that ye present your bodies a living sacrifice, wholly acceptable unto God, which is your reasonable service. And be not conformed to this world, but be ye transformed by the renewing of your mind, that ye may prove what is that good, acceptable, and perfect will of God. So, we would say that verse 1 and 2 is leading us into the will of God, right? So that's what it's leading us into. And so it's telling us, hey, we want to present our bodies as a living sacrifice, holy, acceptable unto God. And the hard part is it says that's our reasonable service. So that's what's expected of us, is just to be doing those things. And then in the verse number 2, it gives us two things here. One, it gives us the word conformed. It's saying don't be conformed to this world. So that means don't mold yourself into what this world is doing. But then it also gives us a parallel of saying that we should be transformed by the renewing of our mind. So when you're conformed to something, you're just mimicking what it is. But when you're transformed, you are becoming what that is. And so we should be transforming into the image of His likeness and functioning in His will, and we should be following after Him. But this is what I've heard a lot in my lifetime going to church, is people start recognizing the will of God as things and not a walk. And so I'll give you the 3 points that I want to hit with you tonight. And that is, the first one is the will of God a place? Is the will of God a position? Or is the will of God a personal relationship? And I've heard many a times, especially with young people, you're going to go to youth camp this week and you'll hear messages and you will get excited about trying to make a difference for God and do something for God. And through that, you might feel like that you've got to find this place or you've got to find this position. And can I just say that those are secondary items to the main thing. The main thing is if we just develop a personal relationship with the Lord and we walk in that relationship, then by just being in that relationship, guess what you are? You're in the will of God. And so, a lot of times we put the preeminence on the wrong items, and then we live a frustrated life because we're always hunting this place, and everywhere we go, it's never the right place. It's because it's not the place, it's Him. Like, He's what it's all about. And it doesn't matter how many places or how many countries you travel to, if your relationship with Him is not right, then everything else is going to be all wrong. And so, the place, the position, or the personal relationship. Now, something I just learned about not too long ago, there was a missionary, and he was over in the Middle East, and he was doing a great work, and some things came about. The government come to him, and they were like, this is your option. Your option is you leave today and you never come back, or we kill you tomorrow. Like, that's your option. And so guess what option he took? He's going to leave today. And so he left. That's the option I would have took too. And so he left. He didn't fight it. He left. And so here's the thing. If the will of God is a place, then is that guy out of the will of God the rest of his life because he can never go back there? Should he just go back and get himself killed so he can say that he died in the will of God? Or maybe the will of God is bigger than a place. And so what has transpired is now he had come to the United States. He's not an American, but he was able to come to the United States and get in here. And so now he is able to have a studio that he goes to, and he produces preaching content that now is being put on the TVs in the countries of where he's not allowed to go to anymore. And so here's the thing, is like, we can get so caught up and feel like, man, what's happening to me right now is a bad thing, and can the government really kick this guy out of the will of God? Well, if the will of God is just a place, then yeah, that could happen. But if your will of God is a personal relationship that you're building with the Lord, then a place does not define that relationship. I know of another missionary. Matter of fact, I believe Victory supports him now, Brother Amir, in Pakistan. He's been here for quite some time for two reasons. One, his wife has a tumor on her brain that they're having a lot of issues with. And the other one is there's been some threats that he will be killed when he gets back. And so he's been in the United States, and so he's got a church over there, and he's got people that he works with over there, but he's having to stay here right now. And guess what? That's not what he even wants to do. He wants to be over there in Pakistan because he's got people that he cares about and loves that he wants to minister to. And so he's having to do it from a removed position. An example from days gone by, but Hudson Taylor, many may know of him. Hudson Taylor was the missionary in China, and he would go and do great works, and at one point he ended up being bedridden, I believe, for about 3 years. And so while he spent 3 years bedridden, does that mean that he was disconnected from the will of God for those 3 years? Now, I don't want you to think that I'm bashing church, and I don't like church, because I do. I love church. I go to church a lot. But church culture sometimes does not match up with the Word of God. And we have to examine whether or not church culture is influencing our life, or is the Word of God influencing our life? And so, can I say that it's much more important to be influenced by the Word of God than it is church culture? And so, I'll give you something to chew on for a moment. In Psalms 23 and verse number 3, it says, He restoreth my soul, He leadeth me into the paths of righteousness for His name's sake. Now, isn't it interesting that it says paths? Shouldn't it be a path if it's one place? Well, you think, well, maybe that's just an accident. Well, if you look in Proverbs chapter number 3 and verse number 5 and 6, verses we quote all the time, it tells us to do what? Trust in the Lord with trust in the Lord with all thine heart, and lean not unto thine own understanding, for in all thy ways acknowledge Him, and He shall direct thy what? Well, isn't it interesting that all those statements are singular until you get to that, and then it's paths? See, some people portray God as being a micromanager. But I believe, based on the Scripture, He's not a micromanager. Like, the Lord gives us many options in life, and there's many ways things can shake out in life, and the Lord can use your life no matter how some of those things shake out. You know, when you come into church, some of y'all decided to sit on the right, some decided to sit on the left, some decided to sit in the middle. And the thing is does it really matter where you sit in here? It doesn't really matter, does it? And we think, well, that's such a trivial decision. Of course it doesn't matter. Well, God is so powerful, He can look at our lives, and we can be in many different places, and God continues to be able to do a work in our lives no matter where we're at. God's not geographically trapped to us having to be in one place to do something with our life. I mean, when you look at Joseph's life, he got bounced around all over the place, and then God still did something mighty with his life, right? And so the place is really not, what it's all about. Our relationship with Him is what it's all about. Now, like I said, I don't want you to think I'm just some preacher basher or anything like that, because I love preachers, and a lot of them are my friends. But sometimes the way we use Scriptures to get our point across, to me, is questionable. I'll give you an example. All right, so Abraham and Sarah, they went into Egypt when there was a famine, right? Was God okay with that? He seemed fine with it. All right. Isaac and Rebekah, they went into the Philistines' land whenever there was a famine, right? Okay. Do y'all remember the Shunammite lady? How she made a little room for the prophet, and then she ends up having a son, and all that takes place. Well, when the famine came to their land, now this is really interesting. The prophet tells her and her family, says, look, there's a famine, go somewhere. Like that's the way it was put. You can read it in 1 Kings chapter number 8. This go somewhere, leave, is basically what they were told. And so she did that. Her and her family, they left. And then when the famine was over, they came back. No big deal, right? But isn't it interesting that everybody that preaches about Elimelech and Naomi, everybody always uses that as them leaving the will of God because they left the place of God, and how when they went to this other place, it was wicked that they went there, and that's why Elimelech died, that's why Melion, Chilion died, is because they shouldn't have never left, and they shouldn't have never went there because they left the place of God, they left the will of God. Now, if you had never heard a message like that, you probably hadn't been in church very long. And if you love somebody that's preached that message, I'm not against them. But I'm just asking you to reason with me tonight and think about what the will of God really is. Because when you look at that story, if that was the case, then why did God preserve that family? Like, not only did He preserve that family, but man, He did something that travels all the way through the New Testament. And so I'm just asking you to reason and think with me tonight about the will of God for your life. And it might be something that you've been stressed about and worried about, but it may be that maybe you're in the will of God right where you're at. So my point with bringing up those other three that left and go to a land, and then the fourth one that left and went to a land and it went bad for them, maybe the real picture here is the fact that bad things just happen sometimes. And just because something bad has happened in your life or in your family does not mean that God's punishing you or judging you. I got to be honest with you. I've seen very little direct judgment of God in anybody's life. Now, what I have seen a lot of is people suffering consequences of their decisions in their life. But it's not God's direct judgment. But the thing is, if we paint God as this micromanager tyrant, then we can take a story like that and very much see Him as being that person that is killing people and just destroying lives because somebody stepped out of bounds for a minute. But when really, what God does show us in that story of that family is He took a lady who was destitute and had no hope and had no future left and turned that into a glorious story that people love to just preach about the goodness of God over. Now, is that not what people, like, is that not the real picture in that pit? So it's sometimes it's just a perception, and sometimes maybe God's just sitting in heaven looking at you and thinking, I think you're doing a good job today, and we're just defeated within ourselves because we feel like there's somewhere else that we should have been today. And we feel like we're sitting in a place that maybe I should have been in this state, or maybe I should have been in this country. I remember years ago, I went to a leadership conference, and at that leadership conference, there was a pastor there, and he was talking about this particular area up in New Jersey, and I got a real burden for it. So for like 6 months, I could not get it off my mind. For 6 months, I thought about it all the time, to the point that I finally told Jennifer one day, I was like, look, I don't know what the deal is, but I feel like we at least need to take a trip up there. Now, it's probably very obvious to you that I am from nowhere near Jersey. Nobody was guessing that, was they? And so, for me to want to leave the southeast and go to the northeast was not an ideal situation for me anyway. But, I thought maybe that's what the Lord wants. And so me and Jennifer, we took a trip up there and spent a few days looking around, meeting some people, doing some things. But when it was all said and done, I had peace that, maybe that wasn't the thing to do. But here's the thing is, whether I stayed in Georgia or whether I went to New Jersey, I truly believe God can be pleased with me in either place. Because the will of God is bigger than Georgia, and the will of God is bigger than New Jersey. And so sometimes we're not careful. We trap our lives into these ideas and stereotypes of things that we've heard, and we allow church culture to predict our thinking over the Word of God. And so I'm just challenging you tonight to think about where you stand with the will of God, and hopefully by the time we get to the end of this message, I hope that you've found comfort in the message and not disappointment. So the next thing to look at here quickly is the position. And so we could get all hopped up about a position and think, man, I've got to have this position in order to be in the will of God. And a lot of young people, they'll go to Bible college, and they come out and they feel like they have to be a pastor. And if they're not a pastor, then they're not in the will of God. Now, here's the thing. If being a pastor is the only way you can be in the will of God, then somebody else can dictate the will of God for your life again. Because guess what happens to pastors sometimes? They get kicked out. And if Brother Knight's life of being in the will of God is contingent on him being a pastor, then that means that everybody sitting in this room could control that for him. And that's not the way it works. There's probably thousands and thousands of pastors that stood behind pulpits this morning that haven't been in the will of God in decades. I'm just being honest with you. And so just because they have a position doesn't mean they're in the will of God. No more than it means that somebody who's not a pastor, it doesn't mean that they're not in the will of God. And so a lot of times we get the order, the priority order just all mixed up. There's a man that I know. He's a great guy. And at one point in time in his life, he was able to give 90% of his income and only keeping 10. And can I say his income was really good? I mean, he had a really good income. And he's giving 90 and only keeping 10. Well, guess what happened? He went bankrupt. And if the will of God for his life was wrapped up in him giving 90, then that means when he went bankrupt, then he was no longer in the will of God, if that's the way we're making the will of God to be. But can I say that that was just something he was performing in the body of Christ, but that wasn't the will of God for him. That was just an opportunity. And so he went bankrupt. And I don't know if you know this or not, but somebody that is doing something like that, and they're creating all these opportunities and all these kind of things. So not only did he go from being worth $40-50 million, then he was worth a negative $60 million. So for some people, being broke is rough, but being broke and then owing $60 million, that's a really bad day. And so you could look at that and be like, oh man, the Lord's judging them for something. Well, maybe the Lord was just trying to show the world that He loved Jesus more than He loved that money. And if we're not careful, our carnal selves, we try to figure out something wrong with somebody just because they're having a hard time. When what I believe God did in that situation is God proved that He loved Jesus more than He loved anything else. Because today, all His kids serve the Lord, and they're rocking on, just carrying on for God, and the Lord's still using Him. And so be careful what you tie the will of God to in your life. Because it may not really have, it may just be an opportunity that's for a season, and then it may change. I personally, when I was younger, in my early 20s, I felt like by the time I was 25 that I'd be in some kind of paid ministry position. Well, here I am quite some time later and never been in any kind of paid ministry position. So does that mean I hadn't been in the will of God for all these years? There was a time when I struggled with that. Like I was really bothered about it because I thought, man, I felt like that's what the Lord really wanted, but maybe that was just what I really wanted and I claimed it was the Lord. So then I find myself a couple decades later serving the Lord in a different kind of way that seems more untraditional than most people. And so the Lord allows me to use business opportunities to be able to help ministries and churches and missionaries and stuff like that in a very unconventional kind of way. And if I would have found myself in some type of paid ministry position, I probably would have never realized the opportunity of how God could use me today. And before I ever got to the spot that I'm in today, though, I had to figure out that, hey, it's really more about just me and God than it is about my position or the place I'm at or any of these other things. I just had to be comfortable with it. Me and God's good. And once I got comfortable that me and God's good, then, man, a lot of the burden and bondage felt like it kind of went away. Now, we say that the Christian life is all about liberty, right? And freedom and all those kind of things. But if we get real honest, the people we encounter in our churches don't seem like people of freedom and liberty, do they? And why is that? And sometimes it's just because our church culture has overcome the Word of God in our life. Now, I believe Brother Knight is probably one of the best pastors in America. And I don't say that just because we're friends. I mean, I say that because I really know his heart, and I know what he preaches and those kind of things. And so a lot of guys, they preach to be heard, you know, like they want you to be impressed with them. And I don't even start off that way because I know that's not going to happen for me. And but you know, some guys, that's their whole play, is they're trying to impress you with something new, or trying to just want you to be just so in awe and enamored by them. But I think Brother Knight is more interested in your life being better through experiencing his preaching than it is you just being impressed with him. And so I say all that to say that I'm not knocking against things that he preaches here, but what I do know is when you've been in church your whole life, you can come to a place that those things aren't being said, and sometimes you still have that in your mind. And so the philosophies and ideas from other places that you might have come to when you get here are still driving your thinking even when you're here. Now, to me, I think a lot of pastors don't provide the will of God in a clear presentation, because if you can equip somebody to believe that they're in the will of God and they don't need you to function in that will of God, then you can't control that person. Somebody who feels like they are fully following the Lord and they are walking in His direction, you're not going to tell them what to do, and you're not going to control their life, because they are letting the Lord guide their life. And so I think that's why church culture has messed up the will of God for so many people's thinking, is because a lot of these pastors feel like they need to control the people that come to their church. And when I say control, I don't mean in like a horrible way, but they need some kind of leverage to get you to do what you're supposed to do almost. And so they present things a little bit skewed, not even realizing what they're actually doing. Now, moving into the third point, let's get down to what is the will of God really about. And if you go to Galatians chapter number 5, I feel like we can get a good representation of that. Galatians chapter number 5. To me, the will of God is not just a place or a position, but it's a lifestyle. And in Galatians chapter number 5 and verse number 16, it says, "This I say then, walk in the Spirit, and ye shall not fulfill the lust of the flesh." Now that's pretty simple, right? And then verse number 18, it says, "But if ye be led of the Spirit, ye are not under the law." There's a lot of freedom when you're not bound by that law. But then when we get down in the verse number 22, this is when it starts getting hard, though. It says, "But the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, long-suffering, gentleness, goodness, faith, meekness, temperance. Against such there is no law. And verse 25 says, if we live in the Spirit, let us also walk in the Spirit. Let us not be desirous of vainglory, provoking one another, envying one another. And so, to me, the will of God is wrapped up in us walking in the Spirit. And guess what? You can be in the will of God anywhere if you'll walk in the Spirit. And as you are walking in the Spirit, this is my philosophy, and you can take it or leave it, but this is what I truly believe. I believe if you are somebody who is trying to be sensitive to the Lord and walk in the Spirit, then the mystical things that we can't figure out that God may want us to do or be involved in our life, we won't have to hunt those things down. The path that we're on, walking in the Spirit, then God will bring those things into our path, and then we can accomplish those things. God is very much aware of where we're all at. And He knows what's going on with us, and He knows everything about us. And so if we can just focus on these things, walking in the Spirit, and then having love and joy and peace and gentleness and goodness and faith, if those kind of things can be the priorities of our life, instead of a position, instead of a place, then God can guide us into the position, and God can guide us into the place that He wants us to be in. But there's also the part that, hey, there may not be some big position that He's trying to put us in. And there may not be some big grandeur of a place that He's trying to take us to. It may be that we just live a Christ-honoring life, and every day that we do that, it makes a difference in other people's life. And I'll just give you my testimony, and yours may be different, but for me, I felt like when I was young that the only way that God could be really pleased with somebody is they had to be a pastor or a missionary or an evangelist. And that's the only options. And if you're not one of those three options, then you're not really sold out for the Lord. But that's not necessarily the way it works. If you can do what Galatians chapter number 5 is saying for us to do here, then you may be way more sold out than a lot of the pastors, missionaries, and evangelists and just not have a position. And you may get more done for God than most of them. Because a title is not what makes you effective. Being real is what makes us effective. And so often the world experiences too many fake Christians because we are focused on the things that make us look good instead of being focused on the things that make God look good. See, having a title makes us look good, right? If you can introduce yourself as I am so-and-so, like that makes you look good. But if you introduce yourself as meekness and joy and peace, you know what that makes look good? Makes God look good. And look, are we supposed to be bringing attention to ourselves, or are we supposed to be bringing the attention to Him? Because it's Him. He's what it's all about. And what good are we actually doing people if we cause them just to be impressed with who we are? The goal would be for them to be impressed with who He is. And in order for people to be impressed with who He is, more than likely they won't really notice much about us. Because all the attention will go to Him. And so, as I kind of wrap it up tonight, Brother Knight, you can come on if you're going to have an altar call or whatever you want to do. But I just want to give you a couple closing thoughts to think about this. And like I said, I hope that these thoughts are encouraging to you and not discouraging. It's kind of the whole objective tonight. But I feel like our life should just be magnifying Jesus Christ and the goodness of Him. They sang that song tonight, The Goodness of God. I mean, like, His goodness is unbelievable. And if we can try to illustrate that to other people, that's what's going to make a change in this world. It's not them being impressed with our title and who we are. And so, as we try to function and perform in the will of God, to me, there's things that will kind of transpire and take place as we're doing that. And it's kind of interesting to me that it talks about a good and acceptable and perfect will of God, kind of like you can hit any of those three phases and He's still okay with you. Is that an interesting thought? And what it may really kind of be broken down in is stages of life. When you look at John 15, it talks about how you were servants, but he talks about how you become friends, and how that servants don't know what their master's doing, but when you move to that friend level, then you have a better understanding of what God's doing. And then, to me, like the third stage is we find in Ephesians where it starts breaking down the relationship between man and woman and Jesus Christ and the church, right? And we're considered the bride of Christ. And so there's a marriage relationship that's involved there. And if you've got a bad marriage, you're going to have a hard time putting this together. But the most unique and deep relationship that can be had is a husband and wife that are functioning in the way God designed it to be. And so we start off as servants serving the Lord, and we don't really know what He's doing or what He's up to, right? We're just along for the ride because we believe it's real. Like, we figured that much out. It's definitely real. And then after a while, we move on to the fact that we become friends with Him, and we got a little bit of an understanding of what He's really trying to do. And so there's a relationship built now, and we kind of enjoy that. But man, when we can move to that third stage where it's just so delightful to enjoy the fellowship of that person. Like in marriage, like when you and your wife can just have a really good night to go and spend some time together, undistracted, and just talk to each other, like you wouldn't trade that for anything, would you? And for us in our relationship with the Lord, like if we can get to that point to where, man, if I can just spend some time with Him, there's nothing better that I can do because it's really just all about Him, then that would be the height of that relationship. And so, good, acceptable, perfect. And so, you might think, well, I would never consider myself perfect. Well, you may not, but God might look at you one day and be like, you know what, you are doing really good. And as odd as it sounds, there's several guys in the Bible that you can find where they're even referenced as being perfect. Now, does that mean that they had no fault? No, but it means they were doing pretty good. And if you ask me about my kids, I'd say, man, they're perfect. But guess what? One of them got a whooping today. But my point being is, like, they're such good kids that I'm not focused on the little things that we have to correct along the way because they're doing so good that you would almost just say, man, they're almost perfect. And can I just say that the Lord may be much happier with you than you are with your life with the Lord.
So I just want to close down with a couple of things, and then you're already up here to play. But I think over the years, you kids some of you young people are about to go to camp, and at a lot of camps I've been to, not all of them, but a lot of them, it's been how many at the end of the week got saved? Raise your hand. How many of you surrendered to be a preacher, be a pastor? And how many of you ladies surrendered to marry a preacher or pastor? And that's what it becomes about. Like the pinnacle of the Christian walk is, I don't think they ever ask how many of you surrendered to go in the military. I don't know if they're going to ask that this week or not, but they ask how many is, and that's the idea, is that we've made it about the pinnacle of being in the will of God as being a pastor. Or if some of you ladies are just lucky enough to be a pastor's wife. And that's, if you can finally achieve that. And I was talking to some people the other day, they've been in ministry, the Baileys. 20 years in the foreign field, then 20 years in America pastoring a church. Not one of their kids pastor a church. And I said, I'd like to find out how your kids, what their relationship was like with God. Why didn't they want to be in ministry? They said, well, that wasn't their spiritual gift. I said, yeah, but in most churches, if you're a pastor, one of your kids is going to be a pastor. It's almost expected. You have to do it. And I started thinking through every pastor I know, one of their kids is a preacher or a pastor. It's almost like, well, because your spiritual gift is that, then God has to give that same spiritual gift to somebody else. So what if they didn't get the same spiritual gift? What if it was something else? Are they less than you are because they're not a pastor? No, because it's not about a position. And some of us were trying to, I remember when I was first coming up, I told these guys about being in Bible college, and the whole time I was in school, I was thinking, I'm supposed to be a missionary? I'm supposed to be an evangelist? Where am I supposed to be? I'd read something, and I'd get a verse, and I'd think I'm supposed to be in Africa. I mean, for a little while, I thought I was supposed to go to Africa. And then a month or two later, it was, no, it's not Africa, it's something else. And it was just, you wanted to find this thing, and you're always looking, is it under this rock? Well, maybe the will of God's under this rock, and you're searching for it, you're trying to figure it out, and it became so crazy and convoluted. And I just imagine, like what you're saying, God's up there going, it's not that hard. If you will just concentrate on walking with me, I will put the things in your path that you need. You stop looking for me under every rock and just start looking for me. I'll direct the path. Stop making it about mystical stuff. Just walk with him. When it's time, you'll know it's time. When it's a thing, you'll know what the thing is. You don't have to find it, figure it out. It's not a tongue twister. It's not a math problem. It's just going to be there. When Brother William called me several times, I feel like God wants me to pastor, and I don't know if I'm doing well enough with this. And we talk all the time about stuff. But you know what? Let me tell you something. That now that he wouldn't say this to you. Do you care if I say stuff about what you do? Well, it's too late now if I started saying it. They do. I won't say how much, but they do. So he does stuff in business now, with investments and buildings and just does a lot with business. He's going to travel this next week, go to Mexico. He's going to help to fund building a house so that an orphanage they can make some money to help an orphanage. He's going to fund it. Their business is going to fund it. Probably gives more in missions than our church gives in missions every year, personally. And you think, did you miss the mark? I don't think so. I think God has gifted him with the ability to do administrative things like that, to accomplish something that if he would have forced himself in the mold of, I've got to be a pastor though. I don't need to do what God's actually gifting me to do, because everybody's told me in all the churches we've been to, the pinnacle of it has got to be a pastor. And that if you're making money, you're actually one of those bad people. Because bad people make money because the love of money is the root of all evil. So you're one of those bad people. And you get in these weird places, you end up with these weird mindsets. You know what he would have missed? He would have missed doing what God really wanted him to do. Which was what? Just walk with me and I'll direct you where I need you to be. That's what walking with God and the will of God is really about. What he just said, that's what it's really about. What God wants for your life will find you. You don't have to find it. You just got to stick with him. He'll direct all the stuff that's supposed to be directed. That, again, writing a book, in one of the first chapters is about all the stuff that you guys have got in your head from places that don't ever preach the Bible. They just preach like a church culture thing. And now you all got these things in your head like you've got to do things and jump through hoops for God to be happy with you, when God might be a lot happier with it than what you think. Thanks for preaching that message. Let's stand on our feet. She's going to play for you and give you a chance maybe to come to an altar. And maybe tonight you don't say, where am I supposed to be at geographically? What position am I supposed to have? Maybe tonight it's just, Lord, I want to have a relationship with you. I want to know you. I want your power, your presence, your love. I want more of you in my life. And maybe that's what you shoot for tonight.